The rain hammered against the glass windows of the upscale restaurant, but inside, warmth and soft piano music filled the air. Seated at a corner table, a woman in her late 20s clutched her wine glass so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her name was Yuna Hayashi, and 5 years ago, she had thrown away the best thing that ever happened to her. Now, watching the man she once discarded laughing with another woman across the room, she finally understood the weight of her mistake. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To truly understand why this moment shattered her, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to when Jin Takeda was just an ordinary college student who believed in love, and Yuna was the girl who promised him forever. Jin Takeda grew up in a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The building was old, its walls thin enough that you could hear the neighbors arguing at all hours, its hallways perpetually smelling of cooking from a dozen different kitchens. His father worked double shifts at a factory, coming home with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion etched into every line of his face. His mother took odd cleaning jobs to make ends meet, scrubbing floors and bathrooms in office buildings while Jin was at school. From a young age, Jin understood that nothing in life came free. He studied under flickering lights that his father couldn't afford to replace, ate simple meals of rice and whatever vegetables were on sale that week, and dreamed of a future where his parents wouldn't have to struggle anymore. There was never any resentment in his heart about their circumstances, only determination, only the quiet promise that someday he would make things better. By the time he reached university on a scholarship, the first in his family to attend higher education, Jin had developed into someone remarkable in the quietest way possible. He wasn't flashy or popular. He didn't drive expensive cars because he couldn't afford a car at all. He didn't wear designer clothes because his wardrobe consisted of whatever his mother could find at thrift stores and clearance sales. But there was something about him that drew people in. Maybe it was the way he listened, truly listened, when someone spoke to him. His eyes would focus completely on whoever was talking, as if their words were the most important thing in the world at that moment. Or perhaps it was how he remembered the smallest details about people, like their favorite coffee order, or the name of their childhood pet, or that offhand comment they made 3 weeks ago about a movie they wanted to see. Whatever it was, Jin Takeda had a presence that made people feel seen. In a world where everyone was desperate for attention, he offered something rarer, genuine attention. Yuna Hayashi noticed him on the first day of their sophomore year. She was sitting in the campus cafe, surrounded by her usual crowd of admirers, a group of wealthy students who orbited her like satellites around a planet. They hung on her every word, laughed at her jokes before she even finished telling them, competed for her approval like it was the most precious currency in existence. And in their world, maybe it was. When Yuna spotted Jin reading alone at a corner table, something strange happened. While every other guy in the room was trying to catch her attention, some staring openly, others pretending to be casual while glancing over constantly, this one didn't even look up. His eyes remained fixed on his book, completely absorbed in whatever story or textbook had captured his imagination. It bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Let me tell you about Yuna Hayashi. She was, by all accounts, the kind of woman who stopped traffic. Long dark hair that cascaded past her shoulders like a midnight waterfall, sharp, intelligent eyes that could cut through any pretense, and a figure that turned heads wherever she went. She came from money, the kind of old family wealth that meant summer homes in multiple countries, international vacations that lasted months, and a trust fund that would keep her comfortable for several lifetimes. Her closet was filled with clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. A single handbag she carried casually cost more than Jin's entire wardrobe. She had never been ignored in her life. Not once. So when Jin Takeda continued reading his book without so much as a glance in her direction, something inside her shifted. Call it curiosity. Call it wounded pride. Call it the thrill of encountering something unexpected in a life where everything was handed to her on a silver platter. Whatever it was, Yuna found herself walking toward his table. She asked if she could sit. Jin looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers for the first time, and nodded once before returning to his book. No stammering, No sudden nervousness. No attempting to impress her with clever remarks or compliments about her appearance. Just a simple acknowledgement and back to whatever had captured his attention. Yuna had never experienced anything like it. She sat down and watched him read, unsure what to do with herself. Eventually, she asked what he was reading. Without looking up, he told her the title, some obscure novel she had never heard of, and offered a brief summary of its themes. His voice was calm, measured, with no attempt to show off his knowledge or make her feel inferior for not recognizing the book. He was simply sharing information the way you might tell someone about the weather. Over the next few weeks, Una found herself seeking him out. She would show up at his study spots claiming to need the same textbooks. She would ask for help with assignments she didn't actually need help with, creating elaborate excuses to spend time in his orbit. And slowly, gradually, like ice melting in the spring sun, Jin began to open up to her. He told her about his family, about the apartment with the thin walls and the flickering lights, about his father's calloused hands and his mother's tired smiles, about his dreams of starting his own business someday, creating something that would provide for his parents and maybe, just maybe, change the world in some small way. He shared the novels he wanted to write but was too afraid to show anyone. Stories he had been working on since middle school, tales of adventure and romance, and courage that lived only in notebooks hidden under his bed. He shared his fears, the terror of failing his scholarship and having to drop out, the worry that he would never be good enough, the anxiety that kept him awake some nights wondering if someone like him was allowed to dream this big. And for the first time in her privileged life, Una felt like she was connecting with someone real, someone who didn't care about her family's name or her designer handbags, someone who just liked talking to her, not to the Hayashi fortune, not to her beautiful face, just to her. Their relationship blossomed like something out of a fairy tale, the kind of love story that makes even cynics believe in romance again. Jin took her to hole in the wall restaurants where the food was incredible and the prices were cheap, places with handwritten menus and grandmothers cooking in the back, recipes passed down through generations. He introduced her to street markets and local festivals she never knew existed, despite living in the city her whole life. There were fireworks and paper lanterns, vendors selling handmade crafts, children running through crowds with sparklers leaving trails of light behind them. He showed her a world that existed outside of country clubs and charity galas, a world of simple pleasures and genuine human connection. And much to her own surprise, Yuna found herself falling deeper with each passing day. Every experience with Jin felt like discovering a treasure she hadn't known she was missing. In return, Yuna brought him into her world. She took him to art galleries where the paintings cost more than his scholarship, explaining the techniques and histories behind each piece with an enthusiasm that surprised even her. She brought him to theatre performances with her family's season tickets, watching his face as he experienced live drama for the first time, his eyes wide with wonder as the actors commanded the stage. She introduced him to her friends, most of whom looked down their noses at his second-hand clothes and lack of social standing, making passive-aggressive comments about his appearance and asking pointed questions about his background. But Jin never let it bother him. He would simply smile, engage them in conversation, ask genuine questions about their lives and interests. By the end of the night, even the most stuck-up among them would grudgingly admit he was interesting company. They were the couple everyone talked about, the princess and the pauper, the beauty and the beast. Only in this version, the beast wasn't a monster at all. He was just a guy from the wrong side of the tracks who happened to have a heart of gold. 3 years into their relationship, Jin was working part-time at a tech startup while finishing his degree. The company was small but promising, run by a few passionate founders who believed in their product. Jin had started as an intern, making coffee and organizing files, but his intelligence and work ethic quickly caught their attention. Within months, he was contributing to actual projects, his ideas implemented in products that real people were using. The hours were brutal, often stretching past midnight as they raced to meet deadlines, but he never complained, not once. Every extra yen he earned went into a savings account he had opened specifically for their future. He called it the Dream Fund in his mind, though he never told Yuna about it. It was his secret, his gift to her. He was planning something special, something he had been building toward for months, maybe years if he was being honest with himself. A ring, not the kind Yuna was used to seeing on her wealthy friends. Massive diamonds that caught the light from across a room, settings designed by famous jewelers that came with certificates of authentication. His was a modest diamond on a simple silver band that had taken him an entire year to save for. He had spent weeks researching, learning about cuts and clarity, reading reviews of different jewelers until his eyes blurred. He had finally found the small family owned shop that took pride in their work, where an elderly craftsman had listened to his vision and created something beautiful. It wasn't expensive by her world standards, but it was everything he could give, and he believed that would be enough. He was going to propose on their anniversary at the little restaurant where they had their first real date, a tiny place with only 8 tables that served the best ramen in the city. He had already spoken to the owner, a kind man who remembered them from that first nervous dinner and had watched their relationship bloom over monthly visits. Jin had arranged for her favorite song to be playing when he got down on one knee, had written out what he wanted to say, and practiced it until the words felt natural. He had even talked to his parents about it, watched his mother cry happy tears, and his father clap him on the shoulder with gruff pride. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. He was going to ask the woman he loved to spend the rest of her life with him, and he was certain she would say yes. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. The first sign of trouble came so subtly that Jin almost missed it entirely. It was a Thursday evening, and they had planned to have dinner at their apartment. Yuna had moved in 6 months earlier, insisting that she wanted to experience normal life with him, though she kept her family's penthouse for occasions that required a certain appearance. Jin had come home early to cook, had spent 2 hours preparing her favorite dishes, had set the table with candles and the nice plates his mother had given them as a housewarming gift. But Yuna was late. She had texted saying work was running over. Just 30 more minutes, she promised. Those 30 minutes turned into an hour, then 2. By the time she finally arrived, the food was cold and Jin's enthusiasm had dimmed to a flicker. She apologized profusely, claimed there had been an emergency at her father's company that required her immediate attention, and Jin believed her. Why wouldn't he? She had never given him a reason to doubt. But after that night, she started working late more often. Her phone, which used to sit face up on the table between them during dinners, suddenly stayed in her pocket at all times. When it buzzed, she would glance at it quickly, her expression shifting in a way Jin couldn't quite read, and then excuse herself to take the call in another room. Jin told himself he was being paranoid. Yuna loved him. She had chosen him over countless wealthy suitors who could have given her the lifestyle she was born into. Her father had introduced her to the sons of business partners, heirs to fortunes that dwarfed even the Hayashi wealth, but she had turned them all down. For him, for Jin Takeda from the apartment with the thin walls. Why would she throw that away? Why would anyone throw that away? But the signs kept mounting. A perfume on her clothes that wasn't her usual scent, something heavier, more masculine than the light floral she preferred. Conversations that would stop abruptly when he walked into the room, her voice shifting mid-sentence into something casual and false. Plans that changed at the last minute with vague excuses that didn't quite add up. Her friend's birthday dinner became a sudden work trip. Their weekend plans cancelled because her mother needed her urgently, though Yuna's mother had never urgently needed anyone in her entire self-sufficient life. Still, Jin pushed his doubts aside. Trust was the foundation of any relationship, and he trusted Yuna completely. He had given her his whole heart, and he believed she had given hers in return. The alternative was too painful to consider. The person planting those seeds of doubt in Yuna's mind went by the name of Kenji Yamamoto. Let me paint you a picture of this man. He was everything Jin wasn't, in both good ways and bad. The heir to a pharmaceutical empire that spanned 3 continents, Kenji drove cars that cost more than most people's houses and thought nothing of dropping six figures on a single night out. He had a reputation for getting whatever he wanted, whether that was a business deal, a rare collectible, or a woman who caught his eye. His smile was perfect, the result of expensive orthodontics and professional whitening, but it never quite reached his eyes. Those eyes were calculating, always measuring, always evaluating what someone could offer him. He had known Yuna since childhood, their families moving in the same circles, attending the same exclusive events, vacationing at the same resorts and the same exotic locations. For years, he had watched her from afar, waiting for his opportunity. He had pursued her briefly in high school, but she had been uninterested then, dismissing him as another boring rich boy with more money than personality. When he heard she was dating some nobody from a poor family, a scholarship student who worked at a startup and couldn't even afford to take her to a proper restaurant, he saw his chance. Not for love. Kenji Yamamoto didn't believe in love, but for conquest. For the satisfaction of taking something that someone else valued, for the power trip of proving that wealth always won in the end. Kenji was patient. He didn't make any obvious moves at first. Instead, he positioned himself as a concerned friend. He would casually mention how Jin probably couldn't give her the life she deserved, framing it as worry rather than criticism. He would invite her to events that Jin couldn't attend, introducing her to influential people and exclusive experiences that highlighted everything her boyfriend lacked. He would point out the differences in their backgrounds, not aggressively, but with the subtlety of water wearing away stone. Did you see how he held his fork at dinner last week? It's not his fault, of course, but it does reflect on you when you bring him to these events. Your father mentioned how awkward the introduction was at the charity gala. Has Jin considered taking some etiquette lessons? I know a great instructor. Small comments that burrowed under Yuna's skin and planted themselves like seeds in fertile soil. Slowly, Kenji began to poison the well. He was careful never to say anything overtly negative about Jin. That would have triggered Yuna's defenses. Instead, he made observations. He raised questions. He let Yuna draw her own conclusions while gently guiding her toward the answers he wanted. Yuna would come home from spending time with Kenji and look at Jin differently. She would notice things she had never noticed before. The way his clothes weren't quite right, how the collar of his shirt was slightly frayed, how his shoes were scuffed in a way that spoke of months of wear rather than intentional distressing, how he sometimes mispronounced words that came naturally to people of her class, technical terms from art history, or names of French wines that everyone in her world learned as children. The fact that he couldn't afford to take her to the places Kenji mentioned so casually, as if spending thousands on a single dinner was nothing more remarkable than buying a cup of coffee. It started as small observations, almost unconscious, but they grew into something more, something ugly, a voice in the back of her mind that whispered what everyone had always told her. You deserve better. You're settling. You're wasting your potential on someone who can never match your level. Kenji was always there to fan those flames. He would take her to exclusive restaurants where you needed connections just to get a reservation, buy her gifts Jin could never afford, show her glimpses of the life she could have had if she had made different choices. He never pushed for anything physical. Not yet. That wasn't part of his strategy. First, he needed her to doubt what she had. Then he needed her to want what he could offer. Only then, when she came to him willingly, would the conquest feel complete. And somewhere along the way, caught between the world she came from and the world she had chosen, Yuna began to forget why she had fallen for Jin in the first place. The quiet strength she had admired started to look like passivity. The simple pleasures they shared began to feel like compromises. The love that had once filled her heart was slowly being replaced by restless dissatisfaction. The night everything fell apart started like any other. Jin had worked a double shift to cover for a sick colleague, spending 14 hours troubleshooting code and meeting with clients. His eyes burned from staring at screens. His back ached from sitting in a cheap office chair. But as he rode the subway home, he felt good. The project they were working on was almost finished, And if it succeeded, he might finally have enough saved for a down payment on a proper apartment. Somewhere Yuna wouldn't have to feel embarrassed about living. He was exhausted, but he wanted to surprise her with takeout from her favorite place, a little Korean restaurant that made the best fried chicken in the city. It was on the opposite side of town from his route home, but he didn't mind the extra travel. Making her smile was worth any inconvenience. He had texted her earlier that he would be home late, so imagine his confusion when he saw lights on in her apartment as he climbed the stairs. His first thought was that maybe she had come home early to wait for him. His heart actually warmed at the thought. She must have missed him. She must have rushed home from whatever she was doing just to be there when he arrived. He should have knocked. Looking back, Jin would replay that moment 1,000 times, wondering if things might have been different if he had just knocked, if he had given her a few seconds of warning, if he had announced his presence instead of assuming his welcome. But he didn't. He had a key. They had been together for 3 years. They lived together, sort of. Why would he knock on his own door? The sound that greeted him when he opened the door froze him where he stood. Laughter. Not just Yuna's laughter, that musical sound he had fallen in love with, but a deeper voice joining in. A man's voice. Rich and confident and entirely too comfortable in a space where it didn't belong. Jin's hand tightened on the takeout bag, the plastic handles cutting into his palm. His feet felt rooted to the floor, his body refusing to carry him further into the apartment, even as his mind screamed at him to see, to confirm, to understand what was happening. Jin found them in the living room. Kenji was lounging on the couch like he belonged there, one arm draped casually around Yuna's shoulders, a glass of expensive whiskey in his other hand. The bottle sat on the coffee table one Jin didn't recognize, probably costing more than his weekly paycheck. They weren't in any compromising position. Not physically, but the intimacy was unmistakable. The way she leaned into him, the way his fingers played with her hair, the way they both looked up when the door opened, their expressions shifting from enjoyment to surprise to something else entirely. Yuna's face cycled through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise first, her eyes widening, her body going rigid. Guilt next, a flash so brief he almost missed it, her gaze darting away from his, and then, horrifyingly, annoyance. Not shame, not remorse, not the desperate apology of someone caught in a mistake they deeply regretted. Annoyance. As if Jin was the one intruding, as if he had interrupted something important. The food containers slipped from Jin's hands and hit the floor. Chicken scattered across the hardwood, sauce splattering against the walls he had helped paint last summer. He couldn't speak. His throat had closed up, all the words trapped somewhere in his chest, along with his shattered heart. Everything he had been planning, the proposal, the ring in his jacket pocket, the future he had imagined so vividly he could almost touch it, all of it crumbling like ash in the wind. Kenji had the audacity to smile. That smug, self-satisfied expression of a man who had won a game Jin didn't even know they were playing. He stood up slowly, straightening his expensive suit, a suit that probably cost more than Jin's entire wardrobe, and walked toward the door. As he passed Jin, he actually patted him on the shoulder, like they were old friends, like he hadn't just destroyed Jin's entire world. The touch burned like acid. What happened next was a blur of words that cut deeper than any knife could have. Yuna didn't apologize. She didn't cry or beg for forgiveness. She didn't even try to explain or minimize what Jin had witnessed. Instead, she went on the attack. Maybe it was guilt manifesting as anger. Maybe she had been building up to this moment for weeks, and the timing just accelerated what was inevitable. Or maybe, and this was the thought that would haunt Jin for years, maybe she had just been waiting for an excuse to say things she had been thinking all along. She said things that Jin would carry with him for years, scars that would take far longer to heal than any physical wound. She said how she had been settling for him, how her friends and family had been right all along when they questioned her choice, how she had wasted the best years of her life on someone who would never amount to anything. She called him a burden, a charity case she had grown tired of supporting. She said Kenji could give her everything Jin never could: real trips to real places, not weekend excursions to local festivals, real clothes that didn't embarrass her when they attended events together, a real future with security and status, and everything a woman like her deserved. And what had Jin given her? 3 years of embarrassment and borrowed time. The ring. Jin thought about the ring sitting in his jacket pocket, pressing against his chest like a hot coal. The year of savings, all those extra shifts and skipped lunches, the carefully planned proposal, every detail chosen with love. He could feel its weight against his chest, a physical reminder of how foolish he had been, how naive, how completely and utterly blind to what was happening right in front of his face. He didn't show it to her. He didn't tell her about the restaurant reservation, or the song he had picked, or the speech he had practiced until he could recite it in his sleep. What would be the point? She had made her choice clear, and it wasn't him. It had never really been him. He had just been a placeholder until someone better came along. Jin didn't say anything. There were no words adequate to the moment, no response that could match the devastation consuming him from the inside out. He just turned and walked out into the night. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam could have. The hallway stretched before him like a tunnel, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead in a rhythm that matched his stuttering heartbeat. He walked down the stairs, one step at a time, counting them because it gave him something to focus on other than the void opening up in his chest. 12 steps, and then the lobby, 12 more, and then the street, one foot in front of the other. Keep moving, keep breathing, don't think, not yet, not now. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Jin's life. He stopped going to class, unable to focus on lectures, when every thought circled back to that night. He stopped going to work, calling in sick until his manager's concern turned to frustration and then to resignation. He lay in his small apartment, the one he had gotten before Yuna, the one with the thin walls and the flickering lights, and stared at the ceiling. The paint was peeling in one corner. He had never noticed that before. How long had it been peeling? Had it started recently, or had it always been there? A flaw he had simply overlooked because he was too busy looking at other things, too busy dreaming about futures that would never come. His phone was filled with messages from friends who had heard what happened. News traveled fast in their social circle, especially news this juicy. The poor boy who dated above his station finally got what was coming to him. Jin could imagine them discussing it over cocktails, shaking their heads with false sympathy while secretly pleased that the natural order had been restored. But he couldn't bring himself to respond to any of the messages. What would he even say? That the girl he loved had looked him in the eyes and told him he was worthless. That 3 years of memories had been reduced to nothing more than embarrassment in a single conversation. That he couldn't eat or sleep or function because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kenji's smug smile and Yuna's look of annoyance. His parents called, worried about his sudden silence. He had always been diligent about checking in, knowing how much they worried about their only son in the big city. He lied and said he was fine, just busy with school and work. His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears, but they wanted to believe him, so they accepted his explanations with only minor pushback. He couldn't bear to tell them the truth. They had been so proud of him for dating someone like Yuna. His mother had framed a photo of them together, displayed it on the mantel next to his graduation picture. His father had talked about her to his co-workers, his chest puffed with pride that his son had landed such a catch. How could he explain that their perfect image had been a lie all along, that their son wasn't good enough after all? Jin hit rock bottom on a Tuesday night. The apartment was a disaster zone, empty takeout containers and unwashed dishes covering every surface. He had been wearing the same clothes for days, maybe longer. Time had lost all meaning in the fog of his depression. He was sitting on his bed, not doing anything, just existing, when he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror across the room. He barely recognized the person staring back at him. Hollow eyes ringed with dark circles, unkempt hair that stuck up in every direction, a beard growing patchy and uneven because he hadn't bothered to shave, clothes stained with food and sweat. This wasn't him. This broken shell of a human being, this pathetic creature wallowing in self pity. This wasn't the person who had worked his way up from nothing. This wasn't the boy who had earned scholarships through pure determination, who had tutored himself through difficult subjects, who had refused to let his circumstances define his future. This wasn't the young man who had dreams bigger than his circumstances, who had believed that hard work and a good heart would be enough to build a life worth living. The turnaround began with a notebook and a pen. Jin sat down at his clean desk, the morning light streaming through windows he had actually opened for the first time in weeks, and wrote out everything he wanted to accomplish in his life. Not goals that revolved around making someone else happy, not dreams of building a life for two, just dreams that were his and his alone. He wanted to graduate with honors despite the classes he had missed. He wanted to start his own company, create something valuable, prove that his ideas had merits beyond the limitations of his circumstances. He wanted to become someone his parents could be proud of, not because of who he dated or what social circles he moved in, but because of what he achieved through his own effort. He wanted to prove, if only to himself, that Yuna had been wrong about him, that he wasn't worthless, that he wasn't a burden, that he was capable of greatness, with or without her validation. That notebook became his Bible. Every morning before getting out of bed, he would read through his goals. Every night before turning off the light, he would write down what he had done to move closer to them. Progress wasn't always visible from day to day, but over time, the pages filled with small victories and incremental gains. It was methodical, it was obsessive, and slowly, painfully, it began to work. Jin threw himself into his studies with a ferocity that surprised everyone around him, including himself. He spent hours in the library every day, making up for lost time, pushing himself to understand concepts at a level that went far beyond what the courses required. Professors who had barely noticed him before suddenly found him at office hours, asking questions, requesting additional reading, engaging with the material in ways that challenged their own understanding. His grades, which had been slipping since the breakup, shot back up, not just to their previous levels, but higher. He graduated not just with honors, but at the top of his class, his thesis recognized as one of the best the department had seen in years. When he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, his parents sitting in the audience with tears streaming down their faces, Jin felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real, genuine hope that the future might be worth looking forward to. But academics were only part of his transformation. Jin started hitting the gym every morning before sunrise, arriving before the doors officially opened, and convincing the early staff to let him in. He had never been athletic, had never seen the point of physical exertion for its own sake. But now he understood it wasn't about building muscles or impressing anyone. It was about discipline. It was about proving to himself that he could do hard things. It was about feeling strong when his emotions made him weak. The physical changes came gradually, so slowly that he almost didn't notice them at first. His skinny frame filled out with muscle, his shoulders broadening, his posture improving as his core strengthened. The bags under his eyes disappeared as he committed to a healthier lifestyle, sleeping regular hours, and eating proper meals instead of the junk food that had sustained him through his depression. People started to look at him differently, not with pity, the way they had right after the breakup when news of Yuna's departure had spread through their social circles, but with curiosity, even admiration. The job offers started coming before he even graduated. Tech companies had heard about the projects he was working on, the innovative solutions he was developing in his spare time, the code he was writing that solved problems others hadn't even thought to address. Recruiters reached out with positions at major firms, salaries that seemed like lottery winnings to someone who had grown up counting pennies. By the time he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, Jin had already accepted a position at one of the most prestigious firms in the country. His starting salary was more than his parents had ever made in a year combined. He bought them a house with his first bonus, It wasn't flashy or extravagant, nothing like the mansions in Yuna's world. Just a modest place, in a nice neighborhood with a garden his mother had always dreamed of. A kitchen big enough for her to cook the elaborate meals she never had room for in the apartment. Bedrooms where they didn't have to hear the neighbors through thin walls. When he handed them the keys, trying to stay composed, trying to act like it was no big deal, his father cried for the first time Jin had ever seen. Just stood there in the entryway of the new house with tears running down his weathered cheeks, unable to speak. His mother held Jin so tightly he thought his ribs might crack, whispering thank you over and over into his shoulder. That moment, standing in the doorway of that little house, was worth more than any revenge he could have taken on Yuna. It was proof that his worth wasn't determined by how someone else saw him. It was proof that the value Yuna had dismissed, had overlooked, had thrown away like trash, was real. He was real. His achievements were real, and no one could ever take that from him. While Jin was climbing to new heights, building his career and his confidence and his new identity, Yuna's fairy tale with Kenji was starting to show cracks. The glamorous life she had chosen, the life that had seemed so much more appealing than what Jin could offer, wasn't quite what she had imagined. Yes, there were the expensive dinners and the designer clothes and the vacations to places she had only seen in magazines. But there were other things too. Things she hadn't anticipated. Things that became clearer as the initial rush of excitement faded into the reality of daily life with a man she didn't really know. Kenji was generous with his money. There was no denying that. But generosity and kindness are not the same thing. He would buy her extravagant gifts, but expect her to be properly grateful, to demonstrate her appreciation in ways that made her uncomfortable. He didn't like her old friends, found them beneath him, and by extension beneath her, so she slowly stopped seeing them. He wanted to know where she was at all times, checking in with texts that seemed concerned at first, but gradually revealed themselves as surveillance. He criticized her choices, not cruelly but with an air of condescension that implied he always knew better. Her outfit wasn't quite right for the event. Her opinion on politics was uninformed. Her taste in music was pedestrian. Small criticisms that accumulated like snowflakes, each one harmless on its own, but together forming a drift that slowly buried who she used to be. And the money. Oh, the money was there, flowing like water, more than she could ever spend. But it came with strings, invisible threads that pulled tighter whenever she tried to move independently. Kenji's family made it clear that Yuna was not their first choice for their precious heir. They had expected him to marry strategically, to choose a woman whose family connections would strengthen their business empire. Instead, he had brought home someone who, despite her own family's wealth, didn't quite measure up to their standards. They treated her with a cold civility that reminded her constantly of her place. She was a guest in their world, tolerated rather than welcomed, included in family events but never quite belonging. The things that had once seemed glamorous now felt hollow. The private jets were just metal tubes. The expensive wines all tasted the same after the first few sips. The parties were performances where everyone wore masks, including her. Yuna started hearing about Jin through mutual acquaintances, people who still moved in overlapping circles. Gossip that spread like wildfire among those who had witnessed their dramatic split. At first, it was just small things. He got a great job at some tech company. He looks different, like he's been working out. But as the months turned into years, the reports became more significant. He started his own company, can you believe it? That guy who could barely afford to take her to dinner? He was featured in a business magazine, some profile about young entrepreneurs changing the industry. He bought his parents a house, not just an apartment, but an actual house with a yard and everything. Each piece of news landed like a punch to Yuna's gut. This was the man she had called worthless, the burden she had grown tired of carrying, the nobody who would never amount to anything. And now he was succeeding beyond anything she had ever imagined, while she was trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had left Jin because she thought he couldn't give her the life she deserved. Now she had the designer clothes and the expensive vacations and the prestigious address. But she had never been more miserable. She had traded something real for something shiny, and only now was she beginning to understand the difference. 5 years had passed since that terrible night. Jin's company had grown from a small startup with 5 employees working out of a cramped office to a major player in the tech industry with branches in 3 countries. He had been featured on magazine covers, interviewed on morning news programs, invited to speak at conferences where industry leaders hung on his every word. He was celebrated as one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the country, a rags to riches story that seemed to inspire everyone who heard it. But success hadn't changed who he was at his core. He still remembered where he came from, still visited his parents every Sunday for dinner, still treated people with the same genuine kindness that had once drawn Yuna to him. The difference now was that kindness was paired with an unshakable confidence that came from knowing his own worth. He had earned everything he had. No one could ever make him feel less than again. He had started dating again, cautiously at first, keeping things casual and light. The scars Yuna had left made it hard to trust, hard to open up, hard to believe that someone might want him for who he was rather than what he could offer. But then he met someone who made him want more. Her name was May, and she was nothing like Yuna. Where Yuna had been all sharp edges and high maintenance, May was warmth and easy laughter. She didn't come from money, didn't care about status or appearances, didn't measure people by the brands they wore or the restaurants they could afford. She was building her own career in architecture, creating beautiful spaces that reflected her unique vision. When she looked at Jin, she didn't see a meal ticket or a stepping stone or a charity case she was lowering herself to tolerate. She saw him, just him, and that was more than enough. The restaurant where Jin and May were celebrating their 6-month anniversary was coincidentally the same one where Kenji's family held their exclusive gatherings. Jin hadn't known that when he made the reservation. It was just supposed to be a nice place for a special occasion, a spot one of his colleagues had recommended with excellent reviews and a romantic atmosphere. So when he looked across the room and saw Yuna sitting alone at a table, a glass of wine in her hand, and an empty seat across from her, the universe seemed to be playing a cosmic joke, a test perhaps, or maybe just a chance encounter with no deeper meaning at all. She had aged, though not badly. The years had added a certain gravity to her features, a depth that hadn't been there when they were together. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a weariness, a sadness, an emptiness that all her money couldn't fill. Jin recognized it because he had seen it in his own reflection years ago in those dark weeks after she destroyed him. For a long moment, he just watched her. This woman who had once meant everything to him, who had held his heart in her hands and crushed it without a second thought. Part of him wanted to look away and pretend he hadn't seen her, to enjoy his evening with May and let the past stay in the past where it belonged. But a larger part, the part that had spent 5 years becoming someone new, someone whole, someone who no longer needed validation from anyone, felt nothing but peace. He had built a life beyond her, a life that was full and meaningful and entirely his own. She couldn't hurt him anymore. That power had died the moment he decided to define himself. Yuna spotted Jin at the exact moment he spotted her. Her breath caught in her throat, her hand freezing halfway to her wine glass. This couldn't be the same person. The man across the room was tall and confident, his shoulders filling out an obviously expensive suit. He moved with the easy assurance of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. He was laughing at something the beautiful woman beside him had said, his smile genuine and relaxed, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way Yuna remembered, but couldn't quite reconcile with her memories. There was no trace of the uncertain boy who had dropped takeout containers on her floor, who had walked out into the night with broken pieces of his heart trailing behind him. This was someone else entirely, someone better, someone she had thrown away. She excused herself from her table, even though Kenji was supposed to arrive any minute. Some business thing had delayed him as usual, and she had been sitting alone for over an hour, nursing her wine and checking her phone and feeling increasingly invisible. But she couldn't help it. Her feet carried her across the room before her brain could catch up, drawn by a force she couldn't explain or resist. Jin saw her approaching and felt a curious detachment, like watching a movie about someone else's life, a drama unfolding on a screen rather than something happening to him in real time. May noticed his expression change and followed his gaze to the elegant woman walking toward them. Her eyebrows raised slightly, a question forming in her eyes. She knew the story. Jin had told her everything back when they first started getting serious, when it became clear this relationship might actually be leading somewhere. He had wanted her to understand the shadows he carried, the scars that hadn't quite healed. But looking at him now, seeing the calm in his eyes, May realized those scars had faded more than even Jin knew. Yuna stopped at their table. Up close, Jin could see the careful makeup that didn't quite hide the circles under her eyes. The designer dress that probably cost more than his first apartment, the diamond bracelet that glittered on her wrist, a gift from Kenji, no doubt. All the trappings of the life she had chosen, the life she had thought was better than what he could offer. The conversation that followed was stilted and awkward, words tripping over themselves in the space between past and present. Yuna made small talk, asking about his work, his family, his life. Jin answered politely but didn't elaborate, offering just enough to be courteous without inviting further questions. He introduced May, whose handshake was firm and whose smile was genuine in a way that Yuna's had never quite been. There was a moment when the two women's eyes met, a split second of silent communication that spoke volumes, recognition, understanding. May knew exactly who this woman was and what she had done. And Yuna knew that May knew. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, and charged. Yuna looked at the woman sitting comfortably beside Jin, clearly cherished, clearly loved. She looked at the subtle touches they exchanged, the way they communicated without words, the easy intimacy of two people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other every day. She remembered when she had that with Jin, when his hand would find hers automatically, when she could finish his sentences and he could anticipate her thoughts. She remembered. And she remembered throwing it away for something shinier. For a man who was late to dinner again, who made her wait alone in restaurants while she checked her phone and pretended she didn't care, for a life that looked perfect in photographs but felt hollow in reality. What happened next surprised even Jin. Yuna's composure cracked, just slightly, just for a moment, the facade slipping to reveal something real underneath. Her voice trembled as she spoke. She apologized. Actually, not the defensive kind of apology that's really a justification in disguise, not the empty words people say to end awkward conversations, but genuine remorse that spilled out of her in a rush. She said she had been wrong. She said she had been young and stupid and influenced by people who didn't have her best interests at heart. She said she thought about him more often than she should admit, wondering what might have been if she had made different choices, if she had been brave enough to choose love over status, authenticity over appearance. She asked if there was any chance, any possibility, any small hope that they could start over, try again, rebuild what she had so carelessly destroyed. Jin let her finish. He owed her that much, not because she deserved it, but because he had spent enough time carrying bitterness. He had learned that holding on to resentment was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So he let her speak, let her words wash over him without pushing back or interrupting. Let her empty herself of everything she had apparently been holding inside for years. When she was done, when the silence had stretched long enough to acknowledge the weight of her confession, he took a breath and spoke the words that would finally close this chapter of his life. He told her he forgave her. That was the first thing, and it clearly wasn't what she expected. Her eyes widened, searching his face for signs of sarcasm or cruelty, but there were none. He meant it. He had spent 5 years learning that resentment only hurt the person carrying it, and he had put down that burden long ago. So, yes, he forgave her, but forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. He told her that the person she had hurt no longer existed. That boy who had loved her so completely, who had planned proposals and built futures around her smile, who had measured his worth by her approval. He had died the night she chose someone else. In his place was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned the hard way that his worth wasn't determined by whether or not someone else chose him. And this new person, this Jin who had risen from the ashes of his former self, had already found someone who saw him clearly, someone who chose him not because of what he could give her, but because of who he was. Yuna's face crumbled. The composure she had fought to maintain dissolved, revealing the grief and regret she had been carrying. For a moment, Jin almost felt sorry for her. She had clearly imagined this going differently. Maybe she thought he would be alone, pining for her after all these years. Maybe she thought wealth and success would make him realize what he had missed out on and come crawling back. But life isn't a drama series. Sometimes the person you discarded finds something better. Sometimes they become something better. And sometimes, by the time you realize your mistake, it's simply too late. The damage is done, the door is closed. And all you can do is live with the consequences of your choices. Jin stood, gently signaling that the conversation was over. May stood with him, her hand finding his naturally, instinctively. They made their goodbyes, polite but final. There were no harsh words, no dramatic declarations, no parting shots designed to wound. Just two people who had once meant everything to each other, acknowledging that their time had passed. As they walked toward the exit, Jin felt lighter than he had in years. The last thread connecting him to his painful past had finally been cut. He was free. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city gleamed under the streetlights, washed clean and full of possibility. Every surface reflected the lights from buildings and cars, creating a mirror world that seemed to go on forever. May looked up at him with a question in her eyes, asking without words if he was okay. Jin smiled, really smiled. He was more than okay. He had spent so long running from his past, trying to outwork the pain, trying to become successful enough that Yuna's rejection wouldn't sting anymore. But standing here now, with a woman who loved him for exactly who he was, he realized the truth. He hadn't needed to become rich or famous or successful to prove his worth. He had just needed to learn to see it himself. Yuna's betrayal had been devastating. He wouldn't pretend otherwise. The pain had been real, the damage profound, the recovery long and difficult. But it had also been a gift in the cruelest possible way. It had stripped away all his illusions and forced him to build something real from the rubble of what remained. It had shown him who he truly was when everything else was taken away. And the person he discovered in that darkness was someone worth being. Back inside the restaurant, Yuna sat alone at her table. Kenji had arrived while she was talking to Jin, had seen her approach another man's table, had stormed out in a jealous rage. She would have to deal with that later. The arguments, the accusations, the cold silence that would follow for days. Right now, all she could think about was the look in Jin's eyes when he said goodbye. There had been no hatred there, no triumph, no satisfaction at seeing her brought low, just peace. The kind of peace that comes from truly moving on, from building a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's validation, from knowing exactly who you are and being content with that knowledge. She thought about the choices that had led her here, the whispers she had listened to, the superficial things she had valued, the real love she had sacrificed on the altar of status and security. She had gotten everything she thought she wanted and lost everything that actually mattered. The wine in her glass had gone warm. She drank it anyway. Jin and May walked through the wet streets, talking and laughing, making plans for the future. He told her about his upcoming product launch. She told him about the building she was designing downtown. They stopped at a street vendor and bought hot coffee, standing under an awning while the last drops of rain fell. It was nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just two people in love, enjoying each other's company on a random evening. And somehow, it was everything. The person Jin had become was not defined by what Yuna had done to him. He was defined by how he had risen after, by the choices he made when everything seemed hopeless, by the man he became when no one was watching. That was his real transformation. Not the money or the success or the magazine covers, but the internal shift from seeking validation to providing it for himself. As they continued walking, Jin thought about the boy who had opened that apartment door 3 years ago, the one whose world had shattered into a million pieces. He wished he could tell that boy what he knew now, that the pain would pass, that the darkness would lift, that someday he would stand in the light and realize the worst moment of his life had been the beginning of something better. But maybe that boy had to walk through the fire to come out forged on the other side. Maybe some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Jin squeezed May's hand. She squeezed back, and together they walked toward whatever came next, leaving the ghosts of the past exactly where they belonged. Behind them, the next morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the windows of Jin's apartment. He woke early, as had become his habit, but didn't immediately reach for his phone or his laptop. Instead, he lay there for a moment, processing everything that had happened the night before. Seeing Yuna had stirred up old memories, but not in the way he expected. Instead of pain, he felt gratitude. Strange as it seemed, he was thankful for the path his life had taken. Without her betrayal, he might have spent his entire life being someone smaller than he was capable of becoming. She had shattered his comfortable illusions and forced him to discover his true potential. In a twisted way, she had given him a gift. May was still sleeping beside him, her hair spread across the pillow like dark silk. Watching her peaceful face, Jin felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. This was real love. Not the desperate, all-consuming attachment he had felt for Yuna, but something healthier, something built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. May knew his flaws and loved him anyway. She challenged him when he was wrong and celebrated him when he succeeded. She had her own dreams, her own ambitions, her own complete identity outside of their relationship. They were two whole people who chose to walk together, not two broken halves trying to complete each other. The months that followed brought more changes than Jin could have anticipated. His company continued to grow, expanding into new markets and developing products that genuinely made people's lives better. He was offered opportunities he had never dreamed of, invitations to speak at international conferences, partnerships with industry giants, acquisition offers that would have made him a billionaire several times over. He turned down the acquisition offers. This company was his baby, built from nothing with his own hands, and he wasn't ready to give it up for any price. But he accepted some of the speaking opportunities, finding that he had a genuine talent for inspiring others. His story resonated with people who felt stuck or hopeless, who believed their circumstances determined their destiny. If a poor kid from a thin-walled apartment could build an empire, maybe they could too. May's career was flourishing as well. Her architectural firm had won several prestigious contracts, and her designs were being recognized in industry publications. They supported each other through the long hours and stressful deadlines, understanding that success required sacrifice and being willing to make those sacrifices together. Their relationship deepened with each passing month, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership. Jin knew with a certainty he had never felt with Yuna that this was the person he wanted to spend his life with. The proposal came on a quiet evening at home, not at a fancy restaurant or exotic destination. Jin had realized that his first proposal attempt, the elaborate setup at the special restaurant with the favorite song, had been more about performance than connection. This time, he wanted something real, something that reflected who they actually were together. He made dinner, they opened a bottle of wine, and when the moment felt right, he got down on one knee with a ring he had designed himself. A simple but elegant piece that May had admired in a jewelry store window months ago, without knowing he was paying attention. She said yes. Of course she said yes. And for the first time in his life, Jin felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. News of the engagement spread quickly through their social circles. Jin's parents were overjoyed, his mother immediately launching into wedding planning mode, despite being told repeatedly that they wanted something small and simple. His friends from work threw an impromptu celebration that lasted well into the night. Even some of the people who had looked down on him during the uni years reached out with congratulations, their tones awkward but seemingly genuine. Jin accepted their well wishes graciously, without bitterness. People could change. He certainly had. The wedding was small, just as they had wanted. Close friends and family gathered in a garden venue that May had actually designed for a client years ago, a space that had always held special meaning for her. Jin's parents sat in the front row, his mother crying happy tears before the ceremony even began. The vows they exchanged were their own words, promises specific to their relationship, acknowledgments of the journeys that had brought them here. When Jin looked at May, standing there in her simple white dress with flowers in her hair, he saw not just the woman he loved, but the future they would build together. A future earned, not given. A future that belonged to them alone. The years that followed were not without challenges. No life is. But they faced those challenges together, a united front against whatever the world threw at them. They had children, eventually, two daughters who inherited Jin's determination and May's creative spirit. They built a home filled with laughter and love, a space where their kids could dream big and feel safe falling down and getting back up again. Jin never forgot where he came from. He started a foundation to help students from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing scholarships and mentorship to young people who reminded him of himself. He spoke at schools and community centers, sharing his story with anyone who needed to hear that their circumstances didn't have to be their destiny. Sometimes late at night, Jin would think about Yuna, not with longing or bitterness, but with a kind of distant compassion. He had heard through the grapevine that she and Kenji had divorced after a few miserable years together, that she had tried to rebuild her life with varying degrees of success, that she had changed, grown, become someone different from the woman who had crushed his heart in that apartment. He hoped she had found peace, not for her sake, but because he had learned that wishing ill on others only poisoned your own soul. The story of Jin Takeda was not really about revenge. It was about transformation, about learning that the worst things that happen to us don't have to define us. They can instead be the catalyst for becoming who we were always meant to be. Yuna had looked at him and seen someone worthless, but she had been wrong. Jin had always had worth. He had just been measuring it by the wrong standards. When he finally learned to see himself clearly, to value his own journey and effort, everything else fell into place. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but authentically, on his terms. As he sat on the porch of the house he had built for his family, watching his daughters chase fireflies in the summer twilight, Jin felt a contentment that went deeper than happiness. This was peace. This was purpose. This was the life he had never known to dream of when he was a poor kid in a thin-walled apartment, studying by flickering lights and hoping for a chance. He had gotten more than a chance. He had gotten everything. And it had all started with the worst moment of his life. If you enjoyed this story of heartbreak and redemption, of falling down and rising up stronger than ever, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We have more incredible stories coming your way, tales of betrayal and revenge, of love lost and found, of ordinary people becoming extraordinary through sheer determination and will. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload, and drop a comment below telling me about your own comeback story, because everyone has one. Everyone has been knocked down at some point. What matters is whether you stay down or get back up. Until next time, remember that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Keep rising, keep believing, keep moving forward, and never let anyone make you feel like you're not enough, because you are. You always have been. You just might not know it yet. But before we end, let me tell you about one more moment that perfectly encapsulates Jin's transformation. It happened about 2 years after that fateful encounter at the restaurant, at a business conference in Tokyo where Jin was the keynote speaker. The event was massive. Thousands of entrepreneurs and investors gathered in a convention center that seemed to stretch on forever. Jin had been nervous about the speech for weeks, going over his notes until they were practically memorized, practicing in front of mirrors, and recording himself to catch any awkward pauses or unclear explanations. The topic was perseverance in the face of adversity, and Jin had decided to share his personal story for the first time publicly. Not the sanitized version his PR team had crafted, but the real version, the heartbreak, the depression. The moment he had looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself, the long, slow climb back to humanity and then to success. It was terrifying to be that vulnerable in front of so many people, but something told him it was necessary, that his story might help someone who was going through their own dark night of the soul. The speech went better than he could have hoped. When he talked about the thin walled apartment, the audience leaned forward. When he described finding Yuna with another man, he heard gasps of sympathy. When he detailed his descent into depression, he saw people nodding with recognition, their own pain reflected in his words. And when he spoke about the moment of transformation, about deciding to rebuild himself from the ground up, the energy in the room shifted palpably. People were inspired. People were moved. People were seeing their own struggles through the lens of his experience and finding hope there. After the speech, Jin was surrounded by attendees wanting to shake his hand, share their own stories, thank him for being so honest about his journey. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. But one person stood out from the crowd, a young man, probably in his early 20s, who waited until everyone else had dispersed before approaching. His eyes were red-rimmed, and Jin could see that he had been crying during parts of the speech. The young man introduced himself as Taro. He said he had just gone through something similar, a devastating breakup with someone he thought he was going to marry. He had been spiraling, had actually been considering dropping out of school, had been contemplating darker things that he didn't want to name out loud. But hearing Jin's story had given him a spark of something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. The belief that maybe, just maybe, the pain wouldn't last forever. Jin didn't know what to say at first. He thought about all the advice he could give, all the wisdom he had accumulated through his own journey. But in the end, he just put his hand on Taro's shoulder and told him the truth, that it would get better, that it wouldn't feel like this forever, that the person who hurt him didn't get to define who he became. That was Taro's choice, and Taro's alone. And then he gave Taro his personal email address and told him to reach out if he ever needed someone to talk to. Taro did reach out multiple times over the following years. Jin watched from a distance as this young man rebuilt his life, graduated with honors, started his own small business, found love with someone who appreciated him. Their correspondence continued sporadically, brief updates about their lives, and the occasional request for advice. Jin never saw himself as a mentor exactly, but something like it. A lighthouse that had survived the storm and could show others where the rocks were. This connection with Taro was just one of many that grew out of Jin's willingness to be vulnerable about his past. He received hundreds of messages from strangers who had heard his story through the speech, through articles, through word of mouth, people from all walks of life who needed to know that hitting rock bottom didn't mean staying there. Jin couldn't respond to all of them personally, but he tried to acknowledge as many as he could. Each message was a reminder of why his journey had mattered, not just for himself, but for the people his story could reach. There were setbacks along the way, of course. Jin's company faced challenges as the industry evolved, competitors who tried to copy his products, market downturns that threatened everything he had built. There were arguments with May that lasted longer than they should have. The inevitable friction that comes from two strong-willed people navigating life together. There were moments of doubt, nights when he lay awake wondering if he had made the right choices, if the success was sustainable, if he was being a good father and husband and leader. But those moments passed, as all moments do. Jin had learned that emotions were temporary, that the only constant was change, that the goal wasn't to feel good all the time, but to keep moving forward regardless of how you felt. He had built resilience like a muscle, exercising it daily through meditation and gratitude practices, and the simple discipline of showing up even when he didn't want to. The person he had become could handle things that would have destroyed the person he used to be. His relationship with his parents deepened over the years. Sunday dinners became a sacred ritual, a time when no work email or business crisis could interrupt. He watched his father finally relax into retirement, taking up hobbies he had never had time for, spending hours in the garden his mother had always wanted. He saw the lines of worry on his mother's face soften as she realized her son was truly happy, truly settled, truly content with the life he had built. The house he had bought them became a gathering place for the extended family, cousins and aunts and uncles, who had once looked at Jin as the poor relation now proud to call him one of their own. Jin made sure his daughters understood where they came from. On special occasions, he would take them to the old neighborhood, show them the apartment building where he had grown up, tell them stories about the flickering lights and the thin walls and the dreams he had nurtured despite the circumstances. He wanted them to appreciate what they had without taking it for granted, to understand that success wasn't given but earned, to carry within them the resilience that had defined his journey. They were growing into remarkable young women, and Jin could see traces of both himself and Mei in their emerging personalities. The foundation he had started continued to expand, helping more and more students break free from the circumstances of their birth. Jin personally interviewed every scholarship recipient, looking for that spark of determination he recognized so well, that hunger to become something more than what the world expected. He funded after school programs and mentorship initiatives, hired people from disadvantaged backgrounds for positions at his company, used his platform to advocate for systemic changes that would make his own story less exceptional and more possible for others. There was a documentary made about his life, a feature length film that followed his journey from poverty to success. Jin had been reluctant at first, uncomfortable with the attention, worried that it would seem like bragging or self promotion. But the filmmaker convinced him that his story needed to be told, that there were millions of people who needed to see that transformation was possible. The documentary premiered at a film festival and received critical acclaim, though Jin was more interested in the messages he received from viewers who said it had changed their perspective on their own lives. And through all of this, through the business success and the foundation work and the family life and the public speaking, Jin remained fundamentally the same person he had always been at his core: kind, genuine, attentive to the people around him. He still remembered names and details, still listened when someone spoke to him like their words were the most important thing in the world, still treated everyone from the janitor to the CEO with the same basic respect and curiosity. Success had amplified who he was, not changed him. The values his parents had instilled in him, the work ethic, and humility and gratitude, remained the foundation on which everything else was built. He thought about Yuna sometimes, though less frequently as the years passed. He hoped she had found whatever she was looking for, that she had learned from her mistakes the way he had learned from his. He held no anger toward her anymore, hadn't for years. She had been young and confused and influenced by forces she didn't fully understand. Her betrayal had been cruel, but it had also been the crucible in which his true self was forged. In a strange way, he was grateful to her, not for the pain, but for the opportunity it had created. The final lesson Jin wanted to share, the wisdom he had accumulated through decades of living and failing and rising and succeeding, was this: your story is not over yet. No matter how dark the current moment feels, no matter how impossible escape seems, no matter how convinced you are that you will never recover, you are not finished. The pain you feel right now is not the ending, it is the inciting incident, the call to adventure, the moment before the hero begins their journey. And you are the hero of your own story. The person who hurt you, whether it was a lover or a friend or a family member or a stranger, they do not get to write your ending. That privilege belongs to you and you alone. You can choose despair or you can choose transformation. You can stay in the wreckage or you can build something new from the rubble. You can let their voice define your worth, or you can discover your own voice and speak your own truth. The choice is yours. It has always been yours. Jin Takeda made his choice in the darkness of a Tuesday night, surrounded by empty containers and unwashed dishes, staring at a stranger in the mirror. He chose to rise. He chose to rebuild. He chose to become someone who didn't need anyone else's validation to know his worth. And that choice led him to everything he had now: a family, a purpose, a legacy that would outlast him. Your choice is waiting for you, whatever form it takes, whatever moment triggers it, whatever happens next in your story. The power to transform is already inside you. It always has been. You just have to decide to use it. If you made it this far, you are part of our community now. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. Drop a comment telling me what moment in Jin's journey resonated with you most. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, no matter what you're going through right now, your story is not over. The best parts might be yet to come. Until next time, keep rising. Let me leave you with one final scene from Jin's life that perfectly captures everything his journey represented. It was a quiet Sunday evening, about 15 years after that night in the apartment. Jin was sitting on the back porch of his home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. His daughters had just gone inside to help May with dinner, their laughter echoing through the open windows. His parents were visiting that weekend, his father dozing in a chair nearby, his mother inside teaching her granddaughters her secret recipe for the perfect dumplings. Everything was peaceful. Everything was exactly as it should be. And in that moment, Jin allowed himself to feel something he had been afraid to feel for most of his life: complete contentment. Not because everything was perfect, because nothing ever is. Not because there were no challenges ahead, because there always are, but because he had built a life that mattered, a life that was real, a life that was his own. He thought about the version of himself who had opened that apartment door all those years ago, the one who had believed that love was enough, that if you just tried hard enough, if you just gave enough of yourself, everything would work out. That Jin had been naive, yes, but he had also been brave in his own way. Brave enough to love fully, brave enough to dream big, brave enough to put his heart on the line, even when the odds seemed stacked against him. And when that bravery was punished, when his heart was shattered and his dreams were mocked, that same capacity for courage had manifested in a different form. The courage to rebuild, the courage to redefine himself, the courage to believe that his worth was intrinsic, not dependent on anyone else's validation or approval. Jin remembered something his father had told him when he was young, before the scholarships and the success and the beautiful life he now enjoyed. They had been walking home from school, Jin carrying a report card with grades that would earn him scholarship someday, and his father had stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. He had knelt down to Jin's level, looked him in the eyes, and said words that Jin had carried with him ever since. His father had said that life would knock him down many times. In many ways, that was guaranteed. But what wasn't guaranteed was how he would respond. That was his choice. He could stay down, bitter and broken, blaming the world for his circumstances. Or he could get back up every single time, until getting back up became second nature, until the world ran out of ways to knock him down. At the time, Jin hadn't fully understood what his father meant, but he understood now. Every setback, every failure, every heartbreak had been a test, not a punishment, but an opportunity. The chance to prove that he could rise again, that he could transform, that he could become someone stronger and wiser and more compassionate than he was before. Yuna had been one of those tests, the most painful one, perhaps, but also the most important. Because in surviving her betrayal, Jin had discovered reserves of strength he never knew he possessed. He had learned that he didn't need anyone else to complete him. He had found his own voice, his own path, his own definition of success that had nothing to do with status or wealth and everything to do with integrity and purpose. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in deepening purples and blues. Jin heard his daughters calling him for dinner, their voices bright with excitement about whatever culinary adventure May and their grandmother had created. He rose from his chair, stretched muscles that were still strong despite the passing years, and walked toward the warmth and light of his home. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, a young man or woman was going through their own dark night, lying awake wondering if the pain would ever end, questioning whether they were worthy of love and success and happiness, believing the lies that someone had told them about their worth. Jin wished he could reach through time and space and tell them what he knew, that they were going to be okay, that this was not the end of their story, that the best chapters were still ahead, waiting to be written, that they had everything they needed to transform, to rise, to become someone extraordinary. It was already inside them, waiting to be discovered. But some lessons can only be learned through living. Some transformations can only happen through experience. So Jin simply sent a silent blessing into the universe, a hope that whoever needed to hear his story would find it, and turned to join his family for dinner. The meal was loud and chaotic and perfect. His daughters argued about something trivial while his father told a story he had told 100 times before, and his mother fussed over whether everyone had enough to eat. May caught his eye across the table and smiled that smile that still made his heart skip after all these years. And Jin felt a wave of gratitude so profound it almost brought tears to his eyes. This was what it meant to rise from the ashes, not just to survive, but to thrive, not just to endure, but to flourish, not just to heal, but to become someone capable of helping others heal. The journey wasn't over. It never would be. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt, more opportunities to grow. But Jin was ready for whatever came next. He had proven to himself that he could handle anything, that the trials of his past had forged him into something unbreakable. And that is the truth at the heart of every comeback story, every tale of redemption, every narrative of someone who was broken and became whole again. The breaking isn't the end, it's the beginning. The pain isn't the destination, it's the path. And the person you become on the other side of suffering is stronger than the person you were before it began. So, whatever you're facing right now, whatever betrayal or loss or disappointment is threatening to define you, remember Jin's story. Remember that the worst moment of his life became the foundation of his greatest success. Remember that the person who tried to destroy him only succeeded in revealing who he truly was. And remember that your story isn't finished yet. The next scene is yours to write. Make it a good one. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe so you never miss another video. And leave a comment telling me what part of Jin's journey impacted you the most. I read every single comment, and your stories inspire me just as much as I hope these videos inspire you. Until next time, keep fighting, keep believing, keep rising. Your transformation is waiting.